Hi guys, welcome to this video. I'm Prashant, I'm the founder of Word Pundit, and I'm bringing this series of videos to you wherein I explain previous year CAT questions. Here I've picked up a CAT RC and this is a passage analysis video. What do I do in passage analysis video? As the name explains, I go through the passages, I read them for you, I explain these passages for you, pick up all important details from different paragraphs, and we try to derive as much information as we can from these passages. We can use this information to solve questions. Now, what is this particular passage all about? This passage is about the mystery of the white-lipped snails. This passage effectively, it takes you on a bit of a scientific journey, right? And it tries to solve a scientific mystery. There's a mystery behind it. What is this mystery here? Group snails as a whole are distributed all over Europe, but a specific variety of the snail with a distinctive white-lipped shell is found exclusively in Ireland and in the Pyrenees mountains that lie on the border between France and Spain. So two locations, Ireland and Pyrenees mountains that lie on the border between France and Spain. The researchers sampled a total of 423 snail specimens from 36 sites distributed across Europe with an emphasis on gathering large number of white-lipped variety. When they sequenced genes from the mitochondrial DNA of each of these snails and used algorithms to analyze the genetic diversity between them, they found that a distinct lineage, the snails with the white-lipped shells, was indeed endemic. Endemic in ecology is when something is confined to a particular place, right? So when something is confined to a particular place, that is called endemic in ecology. So these white snails were endemic to these two regions, to the two very specific and distinct places in questions. So these snails belong to these two places. Now, this is where the conflict arises in this particular question. This is where the dilemma arises. How can a particular variety of a snail be present in two distinct locations, right? Now, there has to be some variation, some genetic variation, right? Or there has to be some difference in genes because we are sampling snails from different locations. There would be some kind of diversity, but there is not. So now explaining this is tricky. Previously, some have speculated that the strange distributions of creatures such as the white-lipped groove snails could be explained by convergent evolution. So this is a theory which is being introduced here. What does it state? In which two populations evolve the same trait by coincidence, but the underlying genetic similarities between the two groups rule that out. The problem is, in this particular case, the author says that the theory of convergent evolution says two populations evolve the same traits by coincidence, right? So there is a coincidence, they evolve the same traits. But here, not only are the traits similar, but the genes are also similar. There is underlying genetic similarity. So this theory is ruled out. Alternatively, some scientists had suggested that the white-lipped variety had simply spread over the whole continent, then been wiped out everywhere besides Ireland and Pyrenees, but the researchers say their sampling and subsequent DNA analysis eliminate that possibility too. If the snails naturally colonized Ireland, you would expect to find some of the same genetic type in other areas of Europe, especially Britain. We just don't find them. Now the problem is, if the snails had spread right across the whole continent, right, there would be some genetic traces somewhere. Even if they were wiped out, there have to be some genetic traces. The snails might be wiped out, there would be some traces, but those traces just don't exist. It's just that these snails, they are present in two different locations and nothing in between. Moreover, if they gradually spread across the continent, there would be some genetic variation within the white-lipped type. Also, along with the genetic traces, there would be some variation because evolution would introduce variety over thousands of years. It would have taken them to spread from the Pyrenees to Ireland. So since it would have taken such a long period of time, there has to be some evolution. That variation doesn't exist, at least in the gene sampled. This means that rather than the organism gradually expanding its range, large populations instead were somehow moved en masse to the other location within the space of a few dozen generations, ensuring a lack of genetic variety. So basically now he implies that the white-lipped snails, they moved en masse and they were moved to these two locations. On both these locations, somehow they were moved en masse. They were moved in one lot, in one go. How did this happen? How did this come about? There is a very clear pattern which is difficult to explain except by involving humans. Davidson said, humans after all colonized Ireland roughly 9,000 years ago, and the oldest fossil evidence of groove snails in Ireland dates to roughly the same era. Additionally, there is archaeological evidence of early sea trade between ancient peoples of Spain and Ireland via the Atlantic, and even evidence that humans routinely ate these types of snails before the advent of agriculture, as the burnt shells have been found in Stone Age trash heaps. So now what we've introduced here is we've introduced another explanation. This time the explanation is human beings, they managed to transport these snails from one location to the other, and sea trade seems to be the likely method. The simplest explanation then, boats. These snails may have inadvertently traveled on the floor of the small coast-hugging skiffs that these early humans used for travel, or they may have been intentionally carried to Ireland by the seafarers as was a food source. The highways of the past were the rivers and the oceans, as the river flanks the Pyrenees was an ancient trade route to the Atlantic. What we are actually seeing might be a long-lasting legacy of snails that hitched a ride as humans traveled from the south of France to Ireland 8,000 years ago. So as humans traveled from the south of France to Ireland 8,000 years ago, these snails, either intentionally as food source or unintentionally, right, they were there on the floor of the boats, they ended up traveling to Ireland. So now what the author has effectively done is, if you look at the whole passage very carefully, he starts off with the general context here, provides a couple of explanations, and then he rules them out, right? So he gives us these explanations here and here, and then he rules them out. He says these are not valid explanations, and then in the last two paragraphs he comes up with the simplest possible explanations and the role of humans, the possible role of humans in this migration. So this is what the whole passage is about. Hopefully so you've understood the passage, taken out the important pointers, and understood the content and context of this particular passage. Thank you very much for watching this video, and as always, happy learning.